Welcome to part two of week four, Regulation in the 20th Century Tech. We're going to talk briefly now about phone technology advances in the first 60 years of the 20th century. By the early 20th century, as we know, there were millions of phones in the US and they were connected to the network, or networks, if you will, once the deregulation or once regulation was put into effect, which allowed interconnection between the Bell system and other small phone companies. Probably one of the most important developments was well, before we get there, let me just bring this point out. There was a lot of development in the backbone and the infrastructure of the telephone networks during these first 60 years. The types of switching centers used, the methods of amplification, which we talked about, to get signals to go further. I'm not going to spend a lot of time in this particular class on the technology of the backbone as much as we're talking about the devices that we used as users. So there's a lot of stuff that went along in the background that we're either going to touch very briefly on or not touch at all. I just want to put that out there. So the phone, the telephone, the device that sits on our tables, the Bell system introduced what we knew as the Bell Model 102 telephone, which was the classic phone that had a handset, sat in a cradle, had a rotary dial on it. It was the beginnings of a phone that sort of looked something like what we're used to seeing. It used a carbon granule transmitter for the microphone. And for those of us who are old enough to know this, I'm not, of course. It used to be in the old days, you could, if your phone sounded muddied or muffled, if you unscrewed the mouth handset part where you spoke into, you could remove this disc that was actually the carbon granule module, and you tap it on the table a few times to shake up the carbon, and then you put it back in and screwed the phone back together, and it worked. It was great ways to do phone repair. Anyway, there was also an electromagnetic receiver or speaker in the handset. The single handset was significant because prior to this, we had two devices, something you held to your ear and something that you held to your mouth. It was placed in a cradle in a base unit, and the rotary dial, when you dialed it, it essentially, the phone company provided current from the central office, as we called it, and that was roughly 50 volts. We'll get into the technology, but if you were to make and break this signal, it sent signals to the equipment at the central office. So if you just hung up your phone, after so many milliseconds, the central office went, oh, the phone is hung up. They're not using the phone. When you took your hand and picked up the phone from the cradle, then that flipped a switch, which was known as the switch hook, and essentially that notified the central office you were there to make a phone call, and it would give you dial tone or whatever it was going to provide to you in order to signal that it was ready to dial. So when you dialed these, when you did the rotary dial, it basically, if you dialed the number 3, it interrupted or turned on and off the phone connection 3 times quickly, dun dun dun. And if you did it 9 times and so forth. So the phone company had equipment that could interpret these pulses, if you will, as a number that you were dialing, and then it could make the connection for you. So this was kind of significant because you could dial the number. You didn't have to rely upon a local operator to connect you across town. Around 1930, the base of the telephone included now the bell or bells and what we called an induction coil, which was necessary for the phone to work properly. As I mentioned before, the electricity was being sent to your phone from the central office now, rather than having batteries in your old phone at home. They used to be the old phones that mounted on the walls, the big wooden boxes, actually held dry cell batteries that had to be maintained or replaced. By providing the electricity from the central office, took that problem out. So like over the next 50 years, there was so much more network technology that was introduced. In the backbone networks, things like microwave was introduced, the step-by-step switching introduced into the central office, and again, we're not going to go deep dive into this stuff. And then by the 1960s, the idea of a touch-tone phone was introduced, bringing what we call dual-tone multi-frequency, or DTMF, and advanced signaling capabilities to the end user. Pretty cool stuff. We're going to switch over to two-way radio technology now and some of the advances in the first 60 years. I tend to be focusing on Motorola because they were probably the preeminent and premier radio company at the beginning. As I've mentioned in previous lectures, other companies, RCA, GE, other companies came out, Harris, making excellent two-way radio equipment. But Motorola was the trendsetter, so I'm kind of focusing there. I'm not at the expense of the other companies. We mentioned earlier, oh, by the way, all of this comes directly from Motorola's history webpage, which is kind of a cool place to explore if you're a radio buff. So, as we talked earlier in a lecture, the early Gavin became a company that created the first radio for a car, and they were very successful back in the 1930s. It was intended for the general public, but it's kind of interesting. The police department and city governments, particularly in the Chicago area, which Gavin and Motorola happen to be based, began ordering radios in their cars, their police cars. So this was sort of the beginning of the relationship with public safety. So it's interesting here. The police departments were obviously always having trouble getting messages to their officers out on patrol. Police officers would use police call boxes. They would be located in the neighborhoods to call into headquarters. Got anything for me? That kind of stuff. So if you're wandering down the street, 5 minutes later you make the call and you find out that there was a burglary 7 minutes ago in your neighborhood. It's a little late to be there or be aware that there's some bad guys coming around the corner. So some of the broadcasting stations, interestingly enough, including WGN, which is a huge AM station in Chicago, they would actually interrupt and broadcast messages from the headquarters to police with patrol cars with the radios. It was basically they call headquarters, right, and then they drive to the clearest phone box and they would call in, but we still had some delays. So some of the police departments kind of thought about, why don't we use these upper frequencies in the radio dial that no one is using, and we could allow headquarters could call us in the car one way and tell us what's going on. So car 16 in your area, be on the lookout for a dog running around or something like that. So the FCC allowed this as experimental licensing, and that essentially led us to the Motorola car radio for the police. So the founder, Paul Gavin, he looked at this and said, there's a need. I could see there's a market that nobody really owned. And that was the beginning of two-way police radio. We're going to skip over now from police radio because that was the beginning of two-way radio communications, which is obviously the precursor to cellular telephones, which we get to later on. We're going to talk about microwaves. What is a microwave? And why do I need to know this? Okay. Well, microwave is a high frequency of radio. We'll show you some spectrum charts here in a minute that were widely used for point-to-point communications. The neat thing about microwave, it's a very, very small wavelength, and I'm not going to get all technical on you here, but it allowed you to use what we call conveniently sized antennas to send the signal in a narrow beam. Normal radio, AM, FM, two-way radios in cars, they transmit their signal in a 360-degree pattern. You see that piece of metal sticking up out of the car, out of the ground for a transmitter, and the signal radiates equally in all directions. Microwave dishes, you've seen them, they're those, we call them parabolic dishes. They look like a snow saucer, turned sideways. You see them on houses for satellite TV, slightly shaped differently for a number of reasons. But these parabolic dishes allowed you to focus the direction of the radio beam, which means I could aim two dishes 40 miles apart on two hilltops at each other, and the two dishes would send and receive the signals with the microwave equipment. But if you were 20 miles either side, you wouldn't see or hear, you wouldn't be able to receive those signals because I've focused it very narrowly. I'm beaming the radio signal. So these narrow beams became really popular because I could use point-to-point communications. I could talk to satellites. I could use deep space radio if we get further into the 20th century. So in some of these microwave frequencies were used for radar or navigation and other things as well. But what was important was it became a way to do wireless transmission of information. And the phone companies adopted these. AT&T installed a massive nationwide microwave network in the 60s, and every community seemed to have a microwave relay tower that was built by AT&T. Not every community, but every region, if you will, is a part of their long lines division. So we talk all about this microwave because it's going to also be very important, these frequencies, as we get closer to wireless communications later on. I talked about the electromagnetic spectrum. Well, you can pause the video here and stare at this as long as you'd like. It's an interesting chart. Essentially, it talks about, and credit to Southeastern University's Research Association, or SURA, where this came from. Um, it's sort of talking about frequency, wavelength, wave number, the electron voltage frequencies. It gets a really craziness here, but uh, I just wanted to throw this out here and let you kind of look at it and get totally confused, because that's why we aren't going to get totally technical. Focus, however, in the lower left part of it, where you see radio spectrum, broadcast wireless and microwave. You see AM radio, you see sound, you see FM radio, television, mobile phones, radar, wireless data, microwave oven. That's where this whole conversation is taking place. As you continue to shift on the bottom half towards the right, you get into visual, or into light, and then infrared, ultraviolet, X-ray, and gamma. So this is the spectrum, starting from sound, 20 hertz to 10 kilohertz, the lower left corner, and going all the way. This is continuous energy spectrum that goes all the way into gamma radiation and beyond. Pause this if you'd like to look at it longer, or just go, wow, that was interesting, and we'll move on. We thought it was going to get simpler. We just took the radio spectrum here, and we've sliced it and diced it up into a billion little pieces here. Well, not a billion, I'm exaggerating, but, and don't even try to study this. You can find this out there on the internet if you really want to get into this. But why did I put this up here? The FCC and the International Telecommunications Union, the ITU, the UN chartered organization that works with radio spectrum, designate what can be transmitted, used, and how frequency chunks can be used, slices of the spectrum. And this is how chaotic and crazy it can be. So it's absolutely amazing. If you look at the second line and your eyes are really good, you'll see that kind of teal colored blue in the middle. That's the broadcast AM radio broadcast band. So that's a big chunk. That's what you would find in your car radio if you still listen to AM radio. And as we go through and look at this thing, move our ways down to line 4, coming from the left, and see another teal band that says broadcasting. That's the old television channels 2 through 14, I believe it was, yes, and so on and so forth. I'm not going to spend much more time on this other than to show you that radio spectrum is phenomenally crowded, complex, and difficult to manage. Now you understand why the FCC is in charge of helping make sure we use the equipment properly.